By focusing on the Syrian regime's commitment to eliminate its chemical weapons, Washington can decisively push Damascus and Russia towards real progress on larger issues and also set the table for limited military strikes if they prove necessary. The thoughts of Andrew J. Tabler, Senior Fellow in the Program on Arab Politics at the Washington Institute. Let's learn more. Tabler starts by stating the following, by focusing on the Syrian regime's faltering commitment to eliminate its chemical weapons, Washington can decisively push Damascus and Russia towards real progress on larger issues and also set the table for limited military strikes if they prove necessary. And also he says, to make matters far worse, the regime is dragging its feet on disposing of its chemical weapons, with only 11% of only the first shipment transferred out of the country so far. Tabler believes that the United States should turn the tables on President Assad using Syria's September decision to sign the Chemical Weapons Convention to leverage to gain compliance on two other issues. First, the political transition as outlined in the Geneva Communique and humanitarian access and evacuation. And second, the implementing of Resolution 2118, which is enforceable by Chapter 7 and measures such as sanctions and use of force following the passage of a subsequent Chapter 7 resolution. Tabler believes pushing now on 2118 would create a useful dilemma, forcing Moscow to reveal whether it is unable or simply unwilling to goad the Assad regime into eliminating its chemical weapons program and negotiating a political transition, an approach that would also prepare the American public for a possible military showdown with Assad this summer over his possible refusal to dispose chemical agents. Tabler says increased shipments out of Syria would take away a strategic weapon that the regime has repeatedly used and keep it from falling into the wrong hands, and focusing on the effort to rid Syria of chemical weapons would help Washington determine exactly where it stands not only with the Assad regime but also with Moscow. The sequencing of this strategy could unfold as follows. First, create diplomatic pressure around Resolution 2118 in terms of both chemical weapons destruction and the transitional governing body outlined by the Geneva Communique. And second, the chemical weapons problem is the only Syrian issue on which there is clear Security Council agreement regarding the steps Assad must take. And third, the US government should continue pushing on the current UN draft resolutions regarding humanitarian access. And in the end, the writer says, so that the Assad regime has radically changed course only when confronted with the US credible threat to use military force. He adds, it is therefore important that Washington emphasizes a point President Obama has already made. US strikes on Syria were only delayed last year, not cancelled. While Washington explored the regime's willingness to deliver on its commitments under Resolution 2118. Taking this tack would not only instrumentalize the credible use of force and create pressure to move, it would also prepare the American public for the necessity of a limited strike in the increasingly likely event that Damascus misses the final June 30th deadline to eliminate its chemical weapons program. And to conclude, Tabler says President Obama will likely face increased Republican criticism over his handling of a crisis to which there will be no easy answers anytime soon. And such pressure is already emerging via tight congressional races that could end Democratic control of the Senate. And he ends by saying the implementation of Resolution 2118 and the potential new humanitarian resolution is the right move both politically and morally. And joining us today is Dr. Imke Henkel, London correspondent for the German news magazine Focus. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello.
As you may have read today, Andrew Tabler of the Washington Institute says by focusing on the Syrian regime's commitment to eliminate its chemical weapons, Washington can decisively push Damascus and Russia towards real progress on larger issues and also set the table for limited military strikes if they prove necessary. Do you agree with Tabler, and how would you comment on his tone, especially when it comes to mentioning military strikes, while many are focusing on a peaceful solution?
I can absolutely see why he would arrive there, because of course you just can't really other than feel very angry that after all what had been agreed, Assad tries again to come out of the agreement and to keep a large proportion of his chemical weapons. But I'm afraid I had to feel when I read this article that tone is overly optimistic. In fact, it seems to portray the frontiers far more clearer than I'm afraid they are. And the pressure has been tried before, and there are complex reasons why it didn't come to a military strike when it was first discussed. But to assume that a military strike or the threat of a military strike would really solve the situation, would push either Russia to confront in Assad, or would Assad push towards being more agreeable, I think that is really quite naive. Also, I mean at some point, it hasn't happened in the past, so why would it happen in the future? And they also mentioned at one stage that getting the rebel forces on board. I mean, there you can see who are the rebel forces. This is one of the major problems in the Syria crisis, really, that you do not know to whom you speak. And assuming that you could, with pressuring to enforce with Resolution 2118, bring rebel forces on board, I think that is just not going to happen, because you do not know who you speak to.
Yes. The article observes that the Assad regime has radically changed course only when confronted with the credible threat of US military force last autumn, and quotes President Obama saying US strikes on Syria were only delayed last year and not cancelled. My question there, in your opinion, do you think these strikes were cancelled due to Assad's course change, or for other reasons, possibly the anti-strike vote at the UK Parliament, which led to Obama suggesting a similar vote at the Senate?
Yes, the UK vote seemed to have played a major role, really, because Obama seemed to be far more determined before the UK Parliament voted against it, which at that time came quite as a surprise, and certainly was also partly a blunder, because British Prime Minister David Cameron did not manage to his own party accordingly. But again, also to assume that Assad has only once considerably and significantly changed his course, I'm not so sure it is true. Assad is a very, very astute politician, as everyone who deals with them has to experience this to their own detriment, and he just played the best very cleverly and pretended to change his course, and as we now can see, he didn't. But the resistance against the military strike, I think now in the UK, is probably quite strong, because Prime Minister Cameron at the time said he understood, he got it, as he put it, that the population is too much against it. And then, of course, Germany will not very likely be participating in it, so yes, the EU probably will not be on side. And
Dr. Henkel, do you think the UK and the EU would support any possible strike in June should President Assad fail to commit to dispose his chemical weapons?
No, as I said, I think that is really unlikely. After Prime Minister Cameron once said he got it, so he listens to objections, I think it will be far more difficult to step back from that and have a second vote in Parliament on that. That will be extremely difficult, especially given that there are many domestic troubles that Mr. Cameron has to deal with, like the Scottish referendum, like the EU elections in May, and upcoming you have referendum elections next year. So there are too many difficulties. And again, Germany is cannot be seen to be on the side of a military strike, and therefore the EU won't go for it.
Similar internal problems, of course, to tackle for President Obama in the States anyway. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Henkel.
Great pleasure.
Thank you. That was Dr. Imke Henkel from the German magazine based in London, contributor based in London for German magazine Focus. And for more updates, please visit us on levant.tv. And thanks for watching, and bye for now.